She then placed him into the sky, where the stars were so dim nobody could see him except with the eyes of a lynx. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Stellar Saturdays with your Young Adult Librarian, me! I'm Lexi. I work at the Tomball County Public Library, and today we're going to be going over the constellation called Lynx. So we've kind of gone over constellations that have an extensive cultural history and mythology, one that has kind of an intermediate mythology, and now we're going to go over one that is considered a more modern constellation, and so it's a little bit lighter on the mythology part. It's very Greek heavy and affiliated, but not, it's going to be more about the constellation itself today. So we are going to be going over the Lynx constellation, which I'm very excited about. And this is a little bit different from the other ones we've done for two factors. One, I've already mentioned, the mythology is not super extensive behind it. And two, it's actually considered one of the major constellations in the sky. And so we're going to kind of go over the makeup and everything else that we've been doing and a little bit about the history. Something that's different about this constellation, again, is the fact this one was more or less named and then it was affiliated with mythology versus being affiliated with mythology and then seeing the pattern in the sky type of situation. So it's a little bit reversed, but it still has some affiliation. So this constellation was actually founded in the 1680s by a Polish astronomer. I'm going to butcher this last name, and I'm so sorry. Is Jonas Hevelius. Now, to him, he was a person who very much prided himself in what he did. He prided himself in his eyesight, and so when he saw this constellation and he named it Lynx, he said, you must have the eyes of a lynx in order to see it. So it was more or less he was giving himself a compliment, which I find sketchy. But I mean, a lot of people name things after themselves nowadays, so. But at least he did it kind of in an indirect way. So he actually saw three really delightful qualities in the Lynx constellation, and these were his three favorite things. He wrote a whole book and everything, and it was published. I think it was published by his wife after he died, type of situation. But he said the three delightful qualities were that it seeks, it sees, and it cannot be seen. So the Lynx constellation is considered to be it's a very, very dim constellation and kind of hard to see. Obviously from his quote. At least without any aid or anything like that. It is, as I said before, it is considered one of the more modern constellations, and therefore it's not typically a direct descent to a mythos. But again, it does have associations, and we will be going over that. So this constellation is actually part of the Ursa Major family of constellations, and it's made up of 8 stars. So a lot of the other constellations that we've kind of gone over is they're part of minor constellations or they're part of larger groups. Lynx is part of a larger group, but also it is considered a major constellation, which is funny because it's hard to see. It's found in the second quadrant of the northern hemisphere, so if you have really good eyes, you will be able to see it from where we live. Actually, it also depends upon your light pollution, if you'll actually be able to see this constellation or not. And it has it actually has about 5 or 6 different features within the constellation. But 2 of the big ones that I'm going to kind of be going over are going to be the Intergalactic Wanderer and the UFO Galaxy. So this is the Intergalactic Wanderer, and it is a globular star-shapely Class 2 cluster, which means it's very highly concentrated in the center, as you can see in the picture. Essentially, what that whole big name means is it's just a massive cluster of stars. So it's kind of funny. This not this constellation. I guess this cluster was actually affiliated to be orbited around the Milky Way, but they later found out this was false because it takes the cluster about 3 billion years to actually complete an orbit around our galaxy. So basically, they thought it orbited around the Milky Way or orbited around the Earth, and not so much. It's more or less, it's kind of fixed within the Lynx constellation area. And let's see what else. Oh, it is one of the most remote clusters, both from a galactic center and from the sun. So it's kind of a little bit more isolated than than a lot of the others that we have seen. And I believe we've talked about one other cluster on here before. It might have been with Corvus, or was it the Phoenix? One of those two had a star cluster as well, but this one is kind of more isolated than the others. So it's more or less the cluster and then a bunch of literal space around it. And then you'll see more of the scattering stars again. This was actually named and discovered by the American astronomer Carl Lapland, who discovered that it was really a globular cluster of stars. So it wasn't just affiliated with the Milky Way. The next one we're going to go over is called the UFO Galaxy, for obvious reasons. So this one was obviously named after its appearance. I believe this is actually one of the more popular images on the Hubble Images website. And this one, again, all of these are within the Lynx constellation. So it's really funny when we talk about constellations because we typically only think about the stars. But I mean, last week we went over Corvus, who actually has basically 2 colliding galaxies within its constellation. So it's very much that concept. It looks, it's smaller on the outside type of situation. So, because when you look at the constellations from here, and even with like binoculars, and unless you have all this fancy technology and all of this, you really don't, most people don't really kind of take into consideration, oh, there's so much more beyond that, or within that section that you're actually looking at. So you may only be looking at 8 stars, but within those 8 stars is other galaxies and planets and more stars, and it's really kind of mind-blowing when you start thinking about it. So this is the UFO Galaxy picture, obviously, and it is about 25 million light years away from us, but that's really the only interesting fact about it. So when I was digging into this, I found it funny. So Lynx does have multiple other features in it, but they're all kind of minor. While the UFO Galaxy really did not have a whole bunch on it, just like who named it, and that was about it, and why it was named the UFO Galaxy. It's one of the more popular pictures because of how aesthetically pleasing it is. But it's funny that the actual star cluster has more to it and more emphasis. It's more of kind of a landmark when you really think about it. Like, this is the predominant feature of this constellation type of situation. Alright, so I guess we'll go ahead and get into a little bit about the mythos behind Lynx. So again, Lynx was one of those constellations where it was more or less Jonas saying one must have the eyes of a lynx, what really gave it its name. And then later on was tied on to mythology due to basically other people doing it. Now, we don't really know if he actually had any intent to really tie it into mythology or not. A lot of people just seem to think it's just based off of his statement. The mythology that this is tied into is a man named Lycaeus of Greece. So we're going to have a lot of Greek mythology in here. Actually, I think that's all that's tied into it. So there's not a whole lot of diversity in the mythos here. So the first version of the story, what goes as so. He was said to have the ability to see in the dark of night and underground, and through trees, walls, and the earth. He used this ability to help his brother Idaeus and himself through many, many adventures, including the Clydonian boar hunt and the Argonaut quest for the Golden Fleece. His last act was to use his sight to save his life of his brother, who was about to be ambushed. The story of this ambush is one of the myths associated with the Lynx. So essentially how that story goes was, obviously he was this very predominant figure in Greek mythology. He did all these heroic quests. And as he was going to save his brother from being ambushed, he essentially was going to die. And one of the gods sought pity on him and put him up into the stars to be forever known type of situation. The second version of the story, however, is not as rewarding. So this, again, I've talked about this before, especially with Corvus. You see a lot of yin and yang situations in Greek mythology when talking about constellations. So much like how Corvus had one where he was placed in the sky because he was really renowned, and then he had another story where he was placed in the sky to be forever taunted and doomed. That's very much what we're about to see here. Lycus was placed in the sky with his first tale because he was very renowned and he did a lot of great feats and he was a good man. The second one, however, is going to portray him as the opposite. And he's going to be placed in the sky to be forever forgotten type of situation. Which makes no sense. So another version of Lycanus goes as so. As the story goes, Hades took Persephone into the underworld. Demeter was grief-stricken and neglected to sow the seeds of the earth as she searched for Persephone. The earth lay barren until Zeus, hearing the pleas of the Greeks, stepped in and ordered Hades to release Persephone. Hades agreed. However, upon releasing Persephone, he gave her a pomegranate, in which she ate. And I believe it was a seed, not a whole pomegranate. She became the goddess of the underworld and could not return to her mother. Zeus again intervened and decreed that Persephone would live in the underworld for only 4 months. And then, for 8 months, she would live with her mother in the upper world. So basically, Zeus said, yo, look, Demeter, you gotta get your stuff together. The world's falling apart here, and I'm tired of hearing these people complain. So he kind of intervened and was like, alright, we gotta come to some kind of agreement. But even though they did this, this placated Demeter's rage and sorrows enough for her to send a messenger. I'm gonna mess up this name probably. Tripotheles. In her dragon-drawn chariot to rain seeds of harvest across the earth. Tropopolis planted and began to task over Cynthia. And she basically started plating the earth and doing all this. And she did this in a place where Lycanus ruled. But Lycanus was jealous and envious ruler, and he plotted to kill Tropopolis and take the credit for the good harvest over Cynthia and the rest of the known earth. He gave Tropopolis his blessings to rain seeds over Cynthia, and he began his labor. Just as Lycanus was about to ambush Demeter, who wanted to watch her seeds be showered on the earth, appeared and changed Lycanus into Lynx. She placed him in the sky where the stars were so dim nobody could see him except for the eyes of a lynx. So that's how that kind of interpretation goes. Like I said, there was a lot of different types of, you see a lot of yin and yang with these things. And while this was probably one of my shortest episodes yet, I think the Lynx constellation is pretty interesting and unique in the fact that it is one of the constellations that has been was named and then after the fact associated with mythology lore. So it's kind of interesting how people always kind of want to give the stars a story type of thing to look at. But anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. I hope you guys had fun and learned a little bit more about constellations, but I will see you all next Saturday. Have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.